Arizona is probably not the first place that comes to mind when you think about significant tornado outbreaks. But on October 5th and 6th, 2010, the atmosphere produced an extraordinary combination of supercells, giant hail, long track tornadoes, and two EF3 tornadoes in particular across the state. What makes this event especially useful for storm chasers is that it shows why you cannot judge tornado potential by geography, time of day, or CAPE alone. When the right ingredients overlap, even the desert southwest can produce a major tornado event. I'm Gabriel Harber, and you are listening to the Storm Chaser Coaching Podcast. Before we dive into the questions with Coach Trey Greenwood, there's a link in the description where you can get the cheat sheet for this episode. Cheat sheets contain all of the notes we use to build out each show, and if you click that link one time, you'll unlock access to the cheat sheets for every single episode we ever have or ever will record. Lastly, this conversation was sourced from one of Trey's videos on his Convective Chronicles YouTube channel. The link for that video is also in the description below in case you want to learn more about the event. Trey, question number one. What ingredients came together to make October 5th through 6th, 2010 such an unusual severe weather setup for Arizona?
Yeah, this was quite the event. This was the largest tornado outbreak to occur west of the Rocky Mountains. So it took quite a perfect confluence of ingredients to get the job done. What we had was a really large closed low, a big trough out over the west coast in perfect position with multiple short waves rotating through. Early October, late September, that time frame, that's what we call the transition season. You still have the remnant monsoon moisture that's left over from the summer monsoon season, but you start to get these Pacific storm systems coming in, and those can interact to get you some severe weather events. And this kind of was the case. We had dew points that were in the 60s all the way up into central Arizona, and that is pretty rare for this time of year, for the October kind of time frame. So you had a big trough, plenty of forcing. You had a lot of moisture. You had some features along with that we'll get into here in a bit. It was just an anomalous combination of ingredients, even for the transition season, which has seen tornado events before in Arizona, but none to this magnitude.
What did the October 5th supercells around Phoenix teach us about moisture, instability, boundaries, and storm mode in the desert southwest?
When Phoenix on October 5th, we actually had some very large hail producing supercells with some baseball to even, I believe, some softball sized hail reports, particularly in the West Valley, which you never see in Arizona at all. And what kind of caused that was a little bit of a plains type dry line that developed. We talked about those 60s dew points that were streaming up into central Arizona. So the west of that, very dry air. What does that remind you of? A plains dry line. You have very hot, dry air to the west, warm, moist air to the east. And we actually had a dry line developing in central Arizona, and the storms developed on that. With the dynamics at play, they were able to become very robust supercells. So just because you're not in the plains or the Midwest or something doesn't mean you can't get those classic severe weather type boundaries and whatnot, like a dry line. A dry line can happen anywhere, and we saw that on October 5th. As far as the instability and stuff goes, it wasn't anything that would be mind blowing if you're a plains chaser per se, but it was enough. And you don't need that much out here, especially with the terrain features at work here. We have very complex terrain in Arizona, which we'll get into here in just a second as well. But it was enough, especially with the dynamics at play. So you can get supercells anywhere, and you can get the ingredients that induce supercells, like a dry line, like those dynamics aloft, anywhere, and they just happen to be pretty optimally placed over the desert southwest, west of where we usually see it, but they just so happen to come together pretty well over the desert southwest on October 5th and 6th to get the job done.
Before we go any further, I just want to remind folks we do have a channel membership on YouTube. It's the best way to support us. It's only $3 per month. You get access to some awesome perks. And even if you're listening right now on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, it's still a great way to show your support for these podcasts to let us know that you're appreciating it. So please consider clicking the link in the description below and checking that out. Next question, Trey, and you already alluded to the answer to this a little bit. Why did the tornado threat increase dramatically during the early morning hours of October 6th, even though the storms developed near the minimum of the diurnal heating cycle?
It was expected that the forcing would come in that would be optimal for initiating severe storms in the early morning hours, and that's what it did. Normally, that would be somewhat unfavorable, especially in an area where we don't really have a lot of instability already. That's usually not going to be favorable for maximizing your severe ingredients and getting a higher end severe weather setup. But what happened was this closed low that we talked about, this big closed trough aloft that was sitting over the west coast, it actually was accompanied by very cold air aloft, and the trough moved just enough east during that time frame to really cool the temperatures aloft. And even though we didn't have the sunshine to heat the surface that is usually needed to boost instability in a severe weather event, we were able to compensate for that because of the really cold air aloft that came in to steepen those lapse rates and really increase the instability. Again, it wasn't a mind blowing amount of instability, but it was just enough. When you have these dynamics at play, it doesn't take a lot. So we were able to get just enough instability, along with the fact that the storms developed orographically. They were developing on the higher terrain of central into northern Arizona, and that orographic forcing from the higher terrain up there. Of course, we have much more mountainous terrain north of the Phoenix area. As you go farther north into Arizona, they were firing on that, getting a little bit of extra influence from the orographic mechanisms that work in the complex terrain up there. And that's how we got those significantly tornadic supercells up in that region.
How were storms able to produce significant and long track tornadoes, though, with only that 500 or so joules per kilogram of mixed layer cape?
That's all we had. And that's all it takes when you have the dynamics that we had in play. This was a very robust closed low aloft with very strong low and deep layer shear. Deep layer shear was in excess of 70, even 80 knots, which is very strong. Usually you only need about 30 knots to support supercells, maybe even not even that in some cases. We had over double that amount in the atmosphere. And wind shear is the changing of the wind speed and direction as you go up in the atmosphere. That's how we get storms to rotate. So we had very strong shear. We had just enough instability to support robust updrafts, and that just allowed them to get off to the races with that those dynamics at play. Again, you also had some complex terrain interactions going on. Winds in the low levels are funneled certain ways on the complex terrain up north in Arizona, and you already had strong low level shear as well with some of the low level dynamics that were in play because you have a strong trough aloft, a strong low level response as well. So we had strong low level flow enlarging those photographs. So we had very strong low level and deep layer shear and just enough instability to support robust updrafts. And it was off to the races from there.
Okay, so putting it all together, what signs should forecasters be looking for in the future in order to identify potential events like this in an anomalous area like the desert Southwest?
Yeah, so these events in the desert Southwest usually have some of the same hallmarks over and over again. You usually have a pretty robust trough out across the West Coast, often a closed low, like we saw on October 6th. And you have anomalously strong instability. Usually in October, we don't see that much instability at all. We're past the peak of monsoon season. We usually kind of lose a lot of that monsoon moisture relative to what it was during peak season. So when you have anomalously strong instability, again, not a mind-blowing amount, only 500 or so joules per kilogram of mixed layer cape. That's above average for this time of year. So that was more than enough instability with that strong trough in the west coast, strong deep layer and low level wind shear. Those are going to be the hallmarks for your severe weather events out in the desert Southwest, along with some of that remnant monsoon moisture that came flowing back with the strong low level dynamics at play, winds out of the south. Usually, those are going to be your hallmarks for higher end desert Southwest severe weather events. Of course, we know that being out in the plains, they don't happen. That overlap of ingredients doesn't happen that much out in the Southwest a lot, but when it does, you can get some pretty nasty stuff.
Trey, one bonus question that I didn't put on our sheet, but this event obviously holds a special place for you. Could you maybe share with the listeners exactly why that is?
I was living in Arizona at the time, and back then I was not super well versed. It was before I started storm chasing. And we actually had a supercell move right over us where we were living in the southeast portion of the Phoenix metro area. And it produced some pretty large hail. Large is relative, nothing all that crazy. But for Phoenix, the Phoenix metro, it was quite large. We didn't get the baseball size hail they got on the west side of the valley, but it was just mind blowing to see that kind of hail here. And it really interested me a lot more in chasing in the desert Southwest. And I wish I would have been chasing back then, as I would have hopefully gotten to see some of these tornadoes out there that happened on the 6th. It was just all in all a really incredible event. And it really, I was already well into storm chasing and severe weather by that point, but it definitely fueled me to start storm chasing and really study severe weather, especially in the desert Southwest where I was living at the time.
Remember to check out those links in the description below and then watch another video.